I think we can start.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stéphane Chailloux. I am the coordinator of the European Research and Innovation Project DOMINO, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this second stakeholder forum um, on the consumers at the core of fermented food innovations. In fact, it's a joint initiative between the DOMINO project and the Cost Action Pimento. And yeah, well, this is a good illustration of how important is the subject. We are more couple of 100 people connecting now. So just as a brief introduction, you all know that fermented foods have re-emerged as a focal point in nutrition science, also for a reason of sustainability and public health. And as interest is growing, of course, the understanding of consumer perceptions and behaviors is very important. And it becomes critical for shaping strategies for research, education, and also industry practices. So the purpose of this second DOMINO Stakeholder Forum and webinar is to spotlight the role of this consumer research in the field of fermented foods, and to present especially the results of the two projects, DOMINO and Pimento, who had sort of common research focus on European consumer perceptions on fermented food and the diet. And also how actually is their level of understanding of the microbes that are used for fermented food production. So this is why also today we have a third webinar to illustrate the industrial perspective on the specific role of dietary microbes. We have today 4 speakers for 3 webinars. The first speaker is Professor Jutta Roosen. She is a professor in marketing and consumer research at the Technical University of Munich, and she's actually work package leader in DOMINO projects for the Living Lab for sustainable and healthy diets. And she would present the results that's been produced in DOMINO for the involving of the consumer to harness the potential of fermented food for healthy and sustainable diets. Then we will move on to a two voices seminar by Dr. Emmanuella Magriplis, who is an associate professor at the Agricultural University of Athens. Dr. Magriplis, she's working on capturing fermented food intake, and especially to see how the nutritional consumptions of fermented foods has a pattern with health. And the second person is going to be Dr. Michail Syrpas, who is associate professor at the Kaunas University of Technology in Lithuania. Dr. Syrpas is focusing his research in biorefining, agro-industrial materials, fermentation processes, and on the development also of functional food. They both are going to present the result obtained in a large survey and work that has been carried out during the Cost Pimento on fermented food consumption across Europe, especially using a new developed tool, the 3 FQ questionnaires that they are going to present. And finally, the third webinar will be done by Dr. Nikoletta Vidra. She's science manager at Yakult Europe since 2022, and her research interests are mainly in probiotics, nutrition, and also cancer and obesity. In terms of organization, so we will do a short discussion after each webinar and for getting the most important questions, but don't worry, there will be a big general discussion after the last presentation, so we can have a broader general discussion. So don't hesitate to use the chats. My colleagues from UFIC here, Deborah, Sarah, and her colleagues will help to gather and list the different questions so we can actually reuse them at the end of the general discussion. So thank you very much again for joining the webinar today, and I'm really looking forward for the upcoming discussions. So now it's a pleasure for me to introduce Professor Jutta Roosen. You please, Jutta.
Yes, thank you, Stefan. It's my real pleasure to present today some results from the Domino project. We conducted a large consumer survey in different European countries regarding the attitudes and knowledge about fermented foods, and we also looked at consumers' acceptance of traditional and novel fermented foods in a choice experiment. So Stefan has already introduced briefly the Domino project. I just want to recap very shortly what is the goal of Domino. Domino tries to demonstrate the health benefit of fermented foods-based diets and intends to design microbial consortia for plant-based fermented foods. I'm involved in Work Package 5, which involves citizens and food system actors in several EU living labs, and we focus in particular on our understanding of consumers' attitudes towards fermented foods. There is a growing demand for healthier and sustainable food, and fermentation is one way to meet this demand. It is practiced by cultures around the world since ancient times and transforms food to create longer shelf life, organoleptic properties, and specific nutritional profiles of foods. Fermented foods are also thought to support the circular economy as it can transform agricultural residues and side streams of fruit, vegetable, and crop processing. And therefore, it helps to preserve abundant harvest and make it available for consumption throughout the years. While innovative fermentation technologies are developing rapidly, little is known about the role of fermented foods in today's diets and consumers' knowledge about fermentation and its health and environmental benefits. So this were then basically the setup for our research questions, where we want to address consumer knowledge about fermented foods, and we look at subjective and objective knowledge. It's about the general level of acceptance and willingness to pay for different fermented foods. We are interested in knowing what are the desired attributes of fermented foods to be developed. And we want to look at consumers' acceptance or willingness to pay and correlate in consumer characteristics. And I will present some of the results to you today. So we conducted a large-scale consumer questionnaire in Europe, which has then these different aspects: consumer subjective and objective knowledge, attitudes towards fermented foods, a choice experiment with a traditional fermented food where we cover fermented vegetables, as you see here on the right picture, and a novel fermented food, which is a plant-based cheese. And we were interested in the question how we can use health and nutrition claims as well as sustainability claims to promote these fermented foods. Before I go into the precise content of the survey, I just give you some information about the procedures. Our field work was done in December of last year, and we had 7 countries: Germany, Spain, France, and Italy, which as countries with a larger population, we sampled around 800 consumers. And in countries with a smaller population, Austria, Estonia, and Ireland, we sampled 400 consumers. We had quotas in place on gender, age, regions of residence, household size, monthly net household income, and you see here the final resulting sample sizes in this table. So we asked consumers about their knowledge, and we thought to find out about their subjective knowledge and their objective knowledge. Following Gambaro et al., we measured subjective knowledge in 4 statements. For instance, people who know me consider me an expert in the field of nutrition. And on the next slide, I can already give you also the average degree of agreement with these statements. We measured agreement to these statements on a scale from 1 to 5. And we see here that people in particular agree to the statement Compared to most other people, I know a lot about the importance of nutrition for health. However, they are more hesitant to agree to a statement like people who know me consider me as an expert in the field of nutrition. And also regarding questions on the microorganisms in food processing and the gut microbiome receive lower agreement scores. Overall, I think in comparison to other surveys, people are quite hesitant to assign high knowledge to these statements. Of course, we are not only interested in knowing what people think, how knowledgeable they are, but we also probe them with objective knowledge questions. And these were true-false questions. Some of the statements are true, here indicated by these little T's, and some of the statements were false, indicated by these F. And so an example was, for instance, fermentation enhances the stability of foods, extending their shelf life. And this was a true statement. And in the following slide, I only give you an insight into the true false, but we also asked them for the certainty assessment of these questions, and we acknowledge this when we later do summary statistics on these objective knowledge questions. These questions come from Athens et al. So here you already see how many people correctly state this statement as true or false. So the first one, for instance, the gut microbiome plays a role in the brain function is a true statement, and about 75% of the respondents got that correctly. On the other hand, you see here a very low bar. Here, all fermented foods contain live organisms is a false statement, and actually only 22% got it right, that the statement is false. So we see quite some variation in their knowledge, but overall we find that, so the general knowledge is quite good. And the more specific it gets on the role of the microbiome, the less strong the answers are. And also, of course, this statement shows very clear that there is also some knowledge gaps. In the survey, we also asked consumers about their attitudes towards fermented foods, and we measured that in 4 dimensions. By now, we have done a confirmatory factor analysis, and we see that we have 4 dimensions, which is a health score, a sustainability score, a naturalness score, and also a sensory appeal score. So this is basically saying how important or how much people agree to these statements. For instance, fermented foods are likely to have a beneficial impact on my personal health, got a relatively high agreement, and this is an example for the statements that are combined into the health score. Regarding sustainability, we, for instance, gave the statement, eating fermented foods is good for the environment. Then we have a national score where we have 2 statements. Fermented foods should be free from additives and they should have a short ingredient list. And then finally, the sensory appeal, which will turn out to be quite important later on. Sensory appeal, for instance, one statement, fermented foods are tasty. And here we measure the agreement to this statement. As I mentioned before, we also had a choice experiment included in our survey. And in this choice experiment, we actually also involved nutrition and health claims as well as sustainability claims. For the health and nutrition claims, as can be seen here, we had 2 claims, whether the food contains gut-friendly bacteria or whether the food supports gut health. We also have sustainability claims, or two alternative sustainability claims. So whether the food helps to reduce food waste, because one can use side streams or imperfect produce, and whether the food is produced locally because we can evening out the consumption and production cycles in throughout the years. So 2 sustainability claims regarding food waste and local production. We also had another claim regarding organic certification, and here we just explained to consumers the normal requirements for organic food in Europe. So what does it mean, a choice experiment? So here you see an example, for instance, for the fermented vegetables, you see a different combination of these claims, for instance, contains gut-friendly bacteria and organic here on the left-hand side, combined with a price. And on the right-hand side, another claim reduces food waste with another price. People could choose now between option A, option B, or they could choose to choose neither option A or B. We had the same also for a novel product, the plant-based cheese, and here you see another combination of the different labels. So these choice cards, they are called, are basically different combinations, random combinations of these different claims and labels, as well as prices, so that we can identify how the labels and the prices influence consumers in their choices. We went through some extensive estimation of the obtained choice data, and we first looked at the heterogeneity of choices, and because we saw people responded differently to these different choice cards, we estimated a latent class model. And I first show you the results for the fermented vegetables. So it's a bit of a challenge in 20 minutes to present all this. But you can see here we have the 2 health claims and the 2 sustainability claims, and this is what I focus on most. And we see here always in these lines that the health claim supports gut health gets much higher values compared to the claim contains gut-friendly bacteria. So we see that in general, people prefer a health claim that talks about gut health, and they don't like to read so much about bacteria in their food. Also, when we look at the sustainability claim, we see that this idea of reducing food waste does not carry so much with consumers than the claim that it supports the local food economy. So being able to claim this can be very helpful. We see here, based on these different estimated values for these different claims, that we can give these classes different names. So for instance, here in the beginning, I have the class of non-adopters, and they have a high value for the non-option, so they mostly chose none, and these are 16% of the sample. We have a class that prefers really products where we don't talk about microbes. So you see here contains bacteria, gives them a really high negative value. We have value seekers that seek as well sustainability as health claims. And we have people with a strong preference for health. And we have also some people with a low price sensitivity. Now we want to exploit these different classes across our sample, for instance, in terms of the diversity of countries that we have in our sample. So for instance, we see here for the Germans, they really prefer products that don't necessarily refer directly to containing bacteria, while we see, for instance, in Italy that we have a high share of people in the cluster with low price sensitivity and value seekers. So here we can well dispose high value products. Also, France has a high share of non-adopters for these fermented foods. We also looked at the attitudes towards fermented foods in these different classes, and we see here these low price sensitivity people that were in particular present in Italy. They have a high positive attitude towards the sensory appeal of fermented foods, and also for the health and local preference cluster, we see that there is a high degree of agreement to the sensory statements. So it seems very important to concentrate also on the sensory property of the fermented foods. Regarding the knowledge, we see here in pink the subjective knowledge and in purple the objective knowledge. And we see here for the low price sensitivity knowledge, people consider themselves really expert in nutrition questions, while the value seekers have low value on the objective knowledge. We did the same thing for the plant-based fermented cheese. And in this case, we only find 3 classes, and we call them, again, the non-adopters, now around 18%. We have the people with a high health interest. Also here now for the cheese containing bacteria seems to go better with cheese than with vegetables. And we see this low interest cluster, which actually has a relatively low choice probability and cannot be addressed with different health or sustainability claims. We see here again across countries, in Germany again and in France as well, high on the non-adopters compared to the other countries. And in Italy again, we have a relatively high share of people with some health interests, and the same is true also for Spain. Yeah. What about the different attitudes towards fermented food? And we see here for those people with a health interest, they respond also strongly to the sustainability aspects of fermented food. And again, we have these people who are not particularly biased by any of the claims. And here the sensory aspect seems to be also important. Again, for the knowledge, we see very high objective knowledge for subjective knowledge, sorry, among the people with strong health interest. And for the objective knowledge, this does not seem to really translate into the different segments. So the low interest segment is the one that actually has the highest objective knowledge. So already looking at this picture shows you also that objective knowledge and subjective knowledge are not necessarily strongly correlated, because people score differently on these dimensions. So to conclude, we observe a divergence of subjective and objective knowledge, and that means our effort in educating consumers about food in general and fermented food in particular, we have to consolidate our efforts to educate consumers so that when they feel they are very knowledgeable, they actually do also have this knowledge. In the choice experiment, we observed that there's about 17% of the consumers that we surveyed who are non-choosers, not interested in the fermented foods. And when we look closer into their actual consumption patterns, we see that previous experience and adoption of fermented food in diet relates to the willingness to purchase the fermented food products offered, also the plant-based fermented cheese as a novel fermented food product. Looking at the claims, we have clear evidence that consumers have a preference for the support gut health as a claim in comparison to contains gut-friendly bacteria or microbes, which is viewed more critical, in particular for the vegetables. Also, the circular economy idea does not pass so well in communicating fermented foods, and local origin is more valued in comparison to circular food streams as a claim. Yeah, with this, I hope I could give you some insights into our survey. I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Jutta. Very interesting. It's not the first time I'm hearing it, but it's still very interesting to see the results. So please, waiting for some very specific questions about presentation from DOMINO results.
I already have some that we have received during the registration phase. Can I read it?
Please go on, Deborah. Yeah, thank you.
So Jutta, what role can nutrition professionals play in bridging the gap between scientific findings and consumer-friendly education?
Yeah, so as we saw that our objective knowledge questions are very different to the subjective knowledge, and I think people sometimes have the idea that different aspects are important to judge their own knowledge. So I think it's important to support consumers in their in their confidence in being able to deal with nutrition and food and health questions. But that we must also better explain what fermentation is, what this means for the microbes, the bacteria, for instance, involved in the foods, how we can ensure safety of the products, and how can we explain also this link between the food microbiome and the consumer microbiome. I think these are very complex questions that are only slowly coming over to the consumer.
Thanks, Jutta. There is one in the chat more about the methodology. What is the profile of the responders? Social, age, if you have an overview, if you can give us an overview.
So we had quotas in place, so I cannot now directly give you an overview. So we have a report on the website of Domino, how we fulfill the quotas, but basically it's representative for the populations of these 7 countries. So the average age or the different age groups are the same as in the population. The gender is representative for the population, income is representative for the population, and we also had different regions in a country. So, for instance, in Germany, the Bundesländer, so that they are proportionally represented in our sample.
Do you have time for another question or no?
Maybe yes, if you have one. I've got one actually, if there is missing, so but I can wait the final discussion for that.
Okay, I'll go with mine. What strategies can food innovators use to bridge the gap between traditional fermentation practices and modern consumer expectations for safety, convenience, and health benefits?
Yeah, so I think it was very interesting to see that contains gut-friendly bacteria was a claim that was not so efficient, in particular with the vegetables, and maybe also for the traditional cheese products. We know that basically microbes are basically transforming the milk into the cheese. So I think it's very important to build on existing knowledge of traditional fermented food products to help educate the consumer also for these novel fermented foods, because they expect even the plant-based fermented cheese to be kind of built on a similar process as a milk-based fermented cheese. Shall I say something to the question in the chat? So
the question is, how do you take into account the EFSA regulation and the possibilities of using the claims in communication and or on packs? That's a good one. Yep.
Yeah. So we did not. So I think this is related to the general objectives of the Domino project, where it is one objective to show the health benefits of fermented food. And so we looked at of course, at the EFSA regulation, but this is not a claim that is accepted. But we did an expert survey within our consortium, what the scientists think could be a realistic claim to be put on these food products. And this gut friendly and supports gut health was then the one that came out. Now, whether this would be a claim that EFSA would accept would be probably subject to future studies, and hopefully some of the results in Domino can bring us forward in this direction, maybe.
So stay tuned to Domino if you want to know about that, probably in a couple of years. So it's time to move to the second webinar. So I'm pleased again to welcome Dr. Emmanuella Magriplis and Dr. Michail Syrpas, who are going to talk about the fermented food consumption across Europe and show the findings from the cost action pimento using the new tool F3Q. So I don't know who's going to start. Is it you, Emmanuella, or Michail?
It is me.
It's you, Emmanuella. So please.
So I think you can see my screen, correct?
Yep.
Okay. So good afternoon to all, and thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very happy to be here and to be able to present our work, which is part of the Pimento, which is promoting innovation of fermented foods. And basically, this first task and what we try to do is map, as it says in the title, map the fermented food intake and provide as much insights as possible when it comes to the European region. And in this phase of the presentation, this is what I will be introducing to you. We know that, as you heard earlier, fermented foods are produced through the exchange of microorganisms. I'm not going to repeat myself. This was nicely presented, and we're aware of this from Jutta as well. What we try to do, and because there's specific definitions when it comes, and various definitions when it comes to fermented foods, we try to follow and take into account as much as possible the International Scientific Association for Probiotics and Prebiotics definition. And of course, as you can understand, it is not something that we can pass on to the consumers, but during the process of selecting the food groups and the information or the examples that we included, we try to be as much in coordination to the definition as possible in order to decrease any reporting error and misclassifications. Therefore, why is this important? Why is the 3FQ? We call it 3FQ because it's a fermented food frequency questionnaire. So there's a simplification behind it. It's a tool, therefore, that is specifically designed in order to capture and to assess, quantify not only the frequency, but the portion size, therefore, to have a quantitative assessment of various fermented foods that we'll be introducing to you very shortly. Why? Because there's limited validated methods specifically designed for this task and for this very important foods, and especially after all the research that is being done for the gut microbiota and a lot of health information and health relations that we see at this point coming out. So if you don't have accurate data for most fermented foods that are not widely consumed, therefore these cannot be actually captured from the nutritional assessments that are usually done using overall food questionnaires at this point, as there are out there, or 24-hour recalls. Therefore, the main goal of the questionnaire was to collect and analyze regarding Europeans' consumers' intake of these foods. We had a total of 73 questions, although we tried very hard not to exceed a 12-minute to 13-minute response time. And we selected also anthropometric information when it comes to age, gender. We calculated the BMI, therefore we have weight and height in this point that was reported, and the region. There were no open-ended questions. Everything was to select through scroll down or specific questions in order to not to have a lot of text entered and therefore creating issues in the questionnaire. A lot of health status and information were uploaded that are diet and nutrition related, also to select, to capture the consumer's profile as much as possible. And of course, when it comes to the fermented foods, we had those in 15 categories across the 4 European regions, depending on what they're usually consumed. And I will be giving you an overview of these specifically very shortly. Overall, we have the 3FQ team included 31 countries and confirmed NCPs, where we had at least 1 NCP per country. Very often we had up to 2. And you can see the distribution and the map behind that. I'm from Greece, as you understand from my title as well, where my main organization comes from. And this is where we also received the bioethics confirmation as well. The overview is that the primary 3FQ, this tool was developed in English after healthcare, like scientists, healthcare professionals, nutritionists, we met again and again in order to capture and to select which types of foods and which subgroups, and by country, what information to select and include in this tool was a procedure. And therefore, the national contact points from each country were then responsible to translate this questionnaire following a specific methodology, translate, where we have, after the expert committee decided and the English tool was produced, we had a forward translation by the NCP and their team, and then another individual that was blinded preliminary from the 3FQ preliminary tool in English, back translated it in order to make sure that everything was assessed and nicely, and the main wording was captured and was maintained. This actually went through a pilot phase as well in order to see whether the consumers that were piloted and were selected had any questions or there were any issues, and whether they were understanding each question separately. The 15 main food groups that we included, you can see them in this slide, included plant-based meat alternatives. And then the subgroups, we had tempeh, tofu, natto, and others, where we have for each question and main fermented food category, there was a general question that was preliminary introduced. Therefore, do you consume plant-based meat alternatives? With some examples. If the consumer responded yes, then there was a subgroups in order to have specific questions that are actually fermented in order for them to select and go through. Therefore, again, decreasing misclassification. This was actually very important, as you will see for the tea question, where a large majority of consumers responded yes, but then when specific fermented teas were actually assessed, you see the responses and results that were completely no. Nobody actually consumed the fermented teas that are actually out there. So this is something interesting where we can add to the knowledge subject and objective as well in this case. The study sample, I will go very fast through this in order just to give you an overview, because we wanted a representative sample from these 4 European regions. Therefore, but we have to follow a step procedure because this is a survey design. Therefore, we had an 80% study power that we took into account in order to achieve 95% confidence interval. And we took into account a 60% response rate, as most epidemiological studies show, in order to have the end attrition rate of 10%. The margin errors, the design effect, because this accounts for the complex study design behind it. So it's not random sampling, it's convenience and snowball sampling with multi-stage stratification. Therefore, a design effect of 1.4 was included. And for information that we don't have, the conservative approach was used to estimate the baseline levels, which is a 50%, therefore 0.5, in order to have the and put calculations, not to go into more detail, but this was translated overall in how many we wanted to actually have for each European region. Therefore, the population per each region was accounted for 4 groups that we wanted representativity for, which means adults 18 to 50 and above 50, because they have different different profiles, let's say, at this point. And as well, we wanted by sex, therefore males and females as well. These are the study regions. So we have 4 Eurovoc based on the Eurovoc definition: Central and Eastern Europe, and you see them listed: Northern Europe, Southern Europe, and Western Europe specifically. And we have achieved representative data for each one of these. And of course, anybody that was 18 plus were recruited through online via snowball sampling, following the dissemination procedure, where we have different infographics that were produced, and therefore through social media, newsletters, the university websites, our contacts, and focus groups in order to achieve a sample. And therefore, you see different infographics with QR codes in order, once you snapshot to get you right into the questionnaire, which we have the survey platform conjointly specifically in order to have all this information, where we had the consent form included in order for this procedure to be completed. These are an overview of the main responses, the total number that we achieved. Therefore, we have 12,818 individual that we selected and responses. Therefore, we have captured a lot of consumers and a lot of information out there. We have the breakdown overall, and as you can see, there is a representative sample for each of the 4 European regions that we actually targeted for. Overall, a new tool has to be validated because this is new. It hasn't been used before. Therefore, the repeated survey, in order to have the repeatability, if the consumer responds the same way again, therefore, we have a repetition test-retest approach. This is the information we gathered from each European region in order to achieve a sample in power for each European region. And we have the accuracy because it's not enough just to have a repetition. Therefore, in both cases, I respond the same way. We also want to have accuracy as much as possible in what I actually consume. This was done in a total, as you can see, of countries that were included for the whole sample. We obtained 420 recalls in this case, although a preliminary for the main food groups, 224 were required. Therefore, we went beyond and had some subgroup analysis as well. The results show that we have a good agreement, and test-retest was between 0.5 to 0.9 in the reliability. Therefore, for most of the fermented foods, there was a small variation when it comes to the Northern European country where we had the smaller sample, but in all cases, we had a good repeatability in total. And this is when it comes to the within agreement interval, the validity of the sample, and we have a good capture, if you see, for all 15 subgroups. When it comes to the paper that will soon be approved, it's under publication at this point, final steps. There's only 2 areas that you see, 2 food groups, the strong spirits and the tea. Strong spirits minimally achieved. You'll see from my colleagues soon the reasons why. When for tea, there's no responses. Like I said, most of us consume tea, but not enough of fermented tea. So this is an area that we need to take into account for the final steps. This is from my side, and I would like to ask my colleague to continue with the results. Michail.
Michail, you're muted.
I'm sorry for that. Hello to everyone. Can you see the slides from my side? Is everything fine? Hello to everyone also from my side, and thank you very much for the introduction and the invitation to present the results of our study. We'll be seeing also some parts of the intake of the fermented food consumption questionnaire and the results that we obtained regarding the 15 food group categories that we were mentioning before. As my colleague already mentioned, we studied 15 different categories, with the most important being also further subdivided into several groups and subgroups. As it could be anticipated, and one of the most complex and diverse categories, and a category that we had tremendous problems on the classification of these items, was the dairy products. When it comes to the consumption pattern, perhaps by no surprise, this was by far the most prevalent category, with 95% of the consumers responding positively that they consume a type of fermented dairy product. One of the options that they had to select were 5 different cheese type categories, with classification based primarily on their hardness and some other criteria based on a nutritional perspective. Most consumed categories were semi-hard cheeses like Edam and Gouda, and soft and fresh cheeses like feta, where frequently consumers were responding that they consume these on a monthly or weekly basis. Moving on to enable the quantification, and as my colleague was mentioning before, to enable the quantification of the portion consumption, respondents were provided with validated pictures or images from specific food atlases. For instance, you can view the portion sizes provided for the cheese groups, where the image on the left, portion size A, was the most typically reported portion size across practically all dairy cheeses and dairy products that they were consumed. Similarly, also other categories of dairy products that were evaluated were yogurt and fermented milks, including all the probiotic beverages. Yogurt was by far the most frequently consumed dairy product, with approximately 50% of the respondents consuming a yogurt portion at least once per week. For those that may be interested, these data were collected before actually the announcement of the FDA and their approval for a qualified health claim for yogurt, linking consumption of 3 servings per week with a reduction in type 2 diabetes. This is something that we have on our mind and we would like to further expand to see if this frequent consumption that is presented in our data corresponds also with prevalence of diabetes in certain European countries. Similarly, also for the yogurts and the fermented dairy products, when it comes to portion sizes with the images, we were using images and figures trying to be as representative as possible of the typical portion and packaging across European region. Due to the limited time, this will be the only category of food items that will be presenting the portion size. For all the rest, we do have data. We did collect data. However, we will not be presenting. Second most prevalent category, and perhaps also by no surprise, was chocolate, with approximately 93% of the respondents answering that they do consume a type of chocolate. Chocolate in this instance was classified as milk chocolate, dark chocolate, and white chocolate. And from a technological perspective, we would not argue on the types of fermentation and what actually occurs over there. Nevertheless, for dark chocolate, most of the consumers responded that they consume it rather infrequently on a monthly or weekly basis with 20 and 17% respectively. Another extremely popular category, also in terms of frequency of consumption, was fermented cereal products. And primarily, when we talk about fermented cereal products, we're talking about bread. Bread, for the purposes of our essay, was classified into 4 subcategories. White and whole grain bread were the most consumed types of bread, with approximately 50% of the total being very frequently consumed on a weekly basis, both for white bread and for whole grain bread, whereas sourdough bread, both in white form or whole grain sourdough bread, was far less frequently intaken. Other fermented cereal products, more specific to certain regions like Trachana or Kisk, were also identified. However, in this case, as we can see, 70% of the consumers responded that they are not consuming this type of products. Moving on to fermented vegetable products, where there are a lot of misclassifications and so on. When it comes to the actually fermented food items, olives and sauerkraut were recognized by consumers, and plenty of them were reporting that they consume them on a frequent month to weekly basis, and to a smaller extent also other products like fermented cucumber, fermented beetroots, and carrots. Overall, as a category, 90% of the consumers responded that they do consume a type of fermented vegetable. Another very frequently consumed category, perhaps again by no surprise, would be coffee. 82% of the participants responded positively that they consume a type of coffee. You can see the 4 subcategories that were presented. And Interestingly, 40% of the respondents answered that they consume at least a portion of espresso on a daily basis. Also, for those that may be interested, we have to specify that there were further subsequent questions when it comes to coffee and other items, requesting also from consumers whether if they consume their coffee or tea along with some sugar or cream, and of course also the portion of these to take it into account from the nutritional perspective. Fermented meat and fish products, of course, as it could be anticipated, fermented meat products were by far more recognized. Again, the classification when it comes to fermented meat items can be rather difficult and challenging. Approximately 77% of the consumers responded positively that they consume this type of category, with frequent monthly or weekly consumption for fermented meat products, and substantially smaller when it comes to fermented fish, which is very specific in certain regions of Europe, and a larger number of participants having rare consumption of fermented sauces deriving from fish or meat. Another popular category were the vinegars, where approximately 70%, specifically 68.6% of the consumers consume a type of vinegar on a frequent basis, primarily on a monthly or a weekly basis, with balsamic and apple vinegar being the most frequently consumed types of vinegars. When it comes to alcoholic beverages, we had three subcategories, beer, wine, and strong spirits. Beer was 60% of the consumers answered that they consume beer. This is happening on a monthly or a weekly basis. Approximately 50% of the consumers consumed a type of beer per month or a week, as it can be seen over here, with substantially smaller percentage of consumers indicating alcohol-free options, whether in beer or cider, when it comes to their frequency of consumption. Close to that was wine, with 65% of the respondents answering positively. Among the types of wine, white wine was the most consumed type of wine reported. Again, showing a similar pattern with rare or a month consumption contributing to approximately 75% of the total. Strong spirits, which, as my colleague indicated, was one of the few categories that we do not have conclusive data. Approximately, this may be attributed perhaps to the small respondents for this part of the study. 48% of the consumers answered that they consume a type of strong spirits such as whiskey, vodka, or others. Moving on, we have the category of less frequently consumed, especially when it comes to their pattern on a monthly or a very rare basis, as it will be seen. Plant-based dairy and meat alternatives, plant-based fermented plant-based products was one of the least popular categories, with only 52% of the respondents answering positively to this part of the questions. Linking it perhaps to the previous presentation, plant-based cheese was by far the least recognized or the least accepted type of product in this category. Similarly, also plant-based meat products and plant-based yogurts were having a small and infrequent consumption, as it can be seen in the tables. When it comes to fermented pulses and legumes, this was another category that frequently consumers can misinterpret. 66% approximately of the consumers asked positively. However, as it can be seen, the most recognized category and the category that is actually a fermented food that it is consumed by the respondents is the sauces, soy-based sauce and tamari sauce deriving from these type of products. Least, by far the most least recognized or consumed category were actually non-alcoholic fermented beverages. We had three different groups and several subclasses below them. Fermented non-alcoholic beverages were by far the least consumed. Only 27% of the respondents consumed a type of fermented beverage. Primarily in this case, it was the type of kombucha. When it comes to fermented teas, as my colleague already mentioned, there was several misconception when it comes to what is actually fermented and what is not fermented tea. 40% answered yes, and further on, when they were presented with truly fermented teas, the response terms dropped to substantially smaller amounts, as most of them answered as never. Similar was the case with fermented beverages, like cocoa beverages, where only 46% of the consumers reported consumption of this type of products. To summarize a bit, the 3FQ, this questionnaire comprehensively assesses the frequency and quantity of fermented food intake across all main food groups. The results that were summarized here provide an evidence of a strong repeatability and accuracy of this tool among the main food groups, suggesting that this tool, the questionnaire that we developed, may be a very useful tool for epidemiological research to help us further address current gaps in fermented food intakes. The questionnaire developed specifically targets fermented foods, which are often missed or underestimated when it comes to generic food frequency questionnaire. By specifically focusing on fermented foods, the 3FQ attempts to minimize and minimizes to a large extent systematic errors of consumption that may occur in general questionnaire. As such, also the questionnaire enables a more robust analysis of the potential associations between fermented food intake and potential health outcomes. The tool overall enhances the accuracy and comparability of the data in future studies on fermented foods, and there is still, as we're highlighting, still a lot of research when it comes to the questionnaire and its result ongoing. A brief overview of the timeline. This activity was created within the Pimento community within the last 2 to 3 years. We had a very short amount of time and very limited funding when it comes to the development of this questionnaire. If you would like some more information when it comes to the protocol of the study, you can find it already published in the JMR research protocols following the specific DOI. If you are interested more on the validation, the paper has passed already peer review, and it is anticipated that it will be very soon published in Frontiers in Nutrition. And the first results from the collective summary of the intake are also expected to be published somewhere within November when it comes to the main results of the consumption of fermented foods across all European regions. We would like to thank, of course, all the Pimento community and all the national contact points that assisted us with this study, the Coast Association and Pimento, of course, also the organizers for inviting us to present these results. If you are interested in collaboration or if you have any further questions, please do not hesitate to contact either me or Emmanuella to help you with that. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you. Very interesting about the methodology and the results. The strengths of it is really broad and EU-wide survey. That's very interesting. So, Deborah, have you noticed any questions from the chat specifically on this presentation?
We are receiving a lot of questions, and I see our panelists already answering. So thank you all. Last question I have here. Do you have any data on which countries included in the study consume the most fermented foods in general?
Yes, and this is actually what we're going to be presenting, and this is what Michail just said, that soon you will be presenting this, like by November, this will be published. So we're analyzing this information now. The point is that we have information about the European regions mostly that we will be introducing, and only those countries that have also accomplished and achieved and got ethical consent will also be able to provide their information. So therefore, there are kind of restrictions on what we can actually produce when it comes for specific countries.
Thanks. Another one, could you elaborate on the main fermented food groups you presented? How do you determine which food's quality as fermented?
Qualify, I think, is the question. This is the discussion that we can be going for hours. It took us and the group of more than 50 scientists that were talking from different backgrounds, a lot of discussion on what actually constitutes and what does not constitute a fermented food. As mentioned before by Emmanuella, we try to adopt the association's terminology when it comes to what constitutes. Briefly, I can mention that we were considering both fermented food items that contain live and dead bacteria. Items like chocolate, you can understand that, of course, in this case, we're talking about just a portion of fermentation that takes place only in the cocoa beans, and then we just have a fermented food item. There are many differences across countries when it comes to the technologies itself. Many food items that they are fermented in specific countries or regions, their technology might be completely different and they may not be fermented. A characteristic example might be perhaps sour cream. In many countries, this is a product of lactic acid bacteria fermentation, where in other cases it can be produced simply by acidification. There are a lot of misconceptions when it comes to actually fermented vegetables. So we were trying to take all this into consideration and try to make a consumer-friendly questionnaire, trying also to minimize the error that the consumer might make without providing unnecessary information in this aspect. The main food categories were the 15 that were presented. You saw also for the vast majority of them the subcategories that were present. And perhaps what it has to be also indicated is that for each category, each country had to give a representative food item. So the cheese products, although you may have seen them classified based on their hardness, the items represented for each country were the most representative for that region. So the NCPs had also the possibility to change not the category, but the examples within the specific category.
Thanks, Michail. I don't know. I have a methodological question, very short, because someone noticed that Sweden is marked on the map, but not listed as used language. And they were wondering if Sweden participated to the study or not.
Manuela, you want to take over or I can answer it? Please.
I can start if you want to add, Michail, something. Because it's in Europe, so therefore Sweden was one of the countries that we included. We had an NCP that started, but by the time we started translating, this was not completed. Therefore, or actually, no, Michail, we had the translation, but it was not disseminated in a large point. Michail, you can take over now.
It was a last-minute addition. We were trying for a long time to find a representative from Sweden. We did find in the last minute, just before launching the questionnaire, we had the Swedish translation. However, as Emmanuella mentioned, because of the last minute and perhaps the dissemination activities from our colleagues there, the participation from Sweden was very small.
So thank you. Stefan, if you agree, we can continue.
Yes, thank you very much again, Dr. Syrpas and Magriplis. So Michail, if you can remove your template from the screen, so I can invite now the last speaker, Dr. Nikoletta Vidra from Yakult. We have heard about microbes in the first webinar and gut-friendly microbes or not. And in the second webinar, we talked about having fermented with or without microbes. And indeed, the notion of microbes is something rather specific about consumers. So the last webinar is going to talk about this specific issue when talking about dietary microbes and probiotics. So Nikoletta, it's your ground. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So one moment, so I can share my screen.
Perfect, with it.
Yeah, is it okay?
Yep.
Perfect. So thank you very much for the invitation, and it is a pleasure, of course, to be part of this. Sorry, I cannot see my screen. Yeah, is it okay right now? It works.
We don't see it in presentation mode, so we need to change the display of your presentation. So
yeah.
Still not. So if you go to the upper panel and no, it's gone again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine with us.
Okay, fantastic. I'm sorry for all this. It happens frequently. So, are we okay now with the screen?
Yeah, we are. Yeah,
Okay,
it's
so
perfect.
I can
Thank you.
continue. Fantastic. So, I will after all these nice talks, what I will try to do is to bring another perspective on the table, and this is about the dietary microbes and what they are, and also give an insight from a consumer and industry perspective, but also scientific perspective. So my presentation will have my talk will have the following structure. I will first explain what are dietary microbes. I will introduce this concept, and then why the focus on them, and then I will present the three different angles, and then I will end with some take-home messages. So what are dietary microbes? First of all, live dietary microbes of dietary microbes is not really a novel concept, but it is a novel scientific concept, as this is in the literature in the last 5 years or so. But for millennia, we already, with our diet, we consume live dietary microbes. Other diet contain sources of those. Do we have a definition for this? No, we don't have an official scientific definition yet, but we do have a framework that we can start talking about them. So what they are a part of our daily diet, of our normal diet. So we ingest them as we consume several foods, and I will come back to that in the next slides. What are they? They are bacteria, archaea, yeast, and fungi. They can be foods or food supplements, but they are not microorganisms indigenous like oral microorganisms that we do have in our body, in our mouth or so. And they are not, due to their name also, live dietary microbes, they do not include dead bacteria. So this is the concept and the framework. And let's continue by trying to understand where can we get them, from which dietary sources. So there are three main dietary sources. One is the raw fruits and vegetables, and the other one is the fermented foods, and this is already mentioned, but I would like to mention again the definition, and I will explain later on why I mention again the definition. So fermented foods are defined according to ISAP as food or beverages made through desired microbial growth and enzymatic conversions of food components. And there are also probiotics. So live dietary microbes can also be consumed through probiotics, which are live microorganisms that, when administered in adequate amounts, they confer a health benefit on the host. So examples of these are fermented milk and vegetables untreated after fermentation so that they are live, yogurt, kimchi, fresh and mature cheese, various fresh fruits and vegetables like uncooked broccoli, celery, green beans, lettuce, apples, berries, and more. So these are the dietary sources of those. And when we try to dip a bit further into this category to understand what they are and what they are not, let's answer in these important questions. Are live dietary microbes probiotics? No, they are not. And why they are not? Because this is why I also introduced the definition again, because they do not require scientific evidence directly linking them to specific health benefits, while probiotics do require that. And if you see the definition at the end of the slide, in order for something to be called probiotic, they should have specific health benefits. And also, live dietary microbes, they do not need to be specifically characterized or taxonomically identified. But at the same time, probiotics are always live dietary microbes because probiotics always have to be live. The second question is, are live dietary microbes and fermented foods the same? No, they are not. Why they are not? Because fermented foods are made with live microbes, but some processing steps can lead to kill or remove the live microbes. So the resulting fermented product does not necessarily have the live microbes, which is by definition something different than the live dietary microbes. So I hope by now that all these three concepts are a bit clearer. So I will move on to the next one. Why should we focus on the live dietary microbes in the end, and why are they relevant? So as I already mentioned, they are relevant both from a scientific point of view, as there are emerging studies showing various health benefits. They are relevant from a consumer point of view, and I will come back to that. And they are relevant also for the food industry. So basically, and I hope to prove by the end of the presentation that they are relevant for all the participants in this webinar. So I will begin with the scientific perspective, and I want to present the old friend hypothesis. Maybe it's known to many of you, but according to this hypothesis, the exposure to non-harmful microbes in food is an important and beneficial source of microbial stimuli for the immune system. But at the same time, with the start of the modern food production and the improved hygiene and sanitation, that led to a reduced number of live microbes consumed by us, by modern humans, when compared to the ones that were consumed before us. By our ancestors. And this decline in the consumption of live microbes coincides with the rise in modern autoimmune disease, as you will see here in this photo. So we see in this image, we see an increase, for instance, in Crohn's disease, in type 1 diabetes, or in asthma. At the same time, we see a decrease in the infectious diseases like hepatitis or tuberculosis. So this happen at the same time. So to continue in this hypothesis, in this concept, there is considerable data showing that the Western diets, they are low in live microbes, and this practically affects the diversity and the composition of the gut microbiota. At the same time, we know from evidence from many studies right now that the diversity and the composition of the gut microbiota affects many health and disease outcomes. I can give many examples like inflammatory disease, inflammatory bowel disease, asthma, allergies, and so on. We also know from various emerging evidence that the consumption of probiotics, and I mention probiotics as this is one of the categories of the live dietary microbes that is really well studied. This has been linked to improve health outcomes and higher diversity of the gut microbiota. So where does this leave us? Could, for instance, live dietary microbes play a role in restoring this gut diversity? So this is what the researchers in this study, Wastik et al. In 2021 tried to assess. So they did a trial of a 3-week intervention. No, basically it was a 17-week trial where they evaluated 2 different diets. One was high in fermented foods and the other one was high in fiber. They decided to choose dietary fibers for 2 reasons. One was that various studies support the role of dietary fibers and the role of short-chain fatty acids, which is a product of dietary fiber fermentation in the gut. So many studies saw already their beneficial effects in human health, but at the same time, they chose dietary fibers because of the fact that their intake is reported to be very low in the US population where this study was done. But of course, their intake is low worldwide, unfortunately. And they also decided to use fermented foods as the second diet, the comparison diet, because as we know, and all the presentations so far proved it, they have gained a lot of popularity in the last years, but we also know that there are reported health outcomes related to the consumption of fermented foods. So basically, they did a 17 weeks study, as I told you. So there was a 3-week pre-intervention period, which was the baseline, followed by 4 weeks of ramp phase. Ramp phase is where participants they had to gradually increase the intake of fermented foods or fiber. Then there was a 6-week maintenance phase where participants were asked to maintain the high level of consumption of high fiber or fermented foods. And finally, there was a 4-week of choice period where participants could maintain their diet to the desired extent. So basically, all participants were asked to increase their consumptions by more than adding at least 20 grams of fiber per day. And when it comes to fermented foods, by adding almost 6 servings of fermented foods per day. So what happened is, first of all, that what is interesting to show is that the participants could adhere to the diet, because this is also usually a problem with dietary interventions. And those in the high fiber diet, they increase the fiber consumption from an average of 21 grams per day to 45 grams per day, which is more than 20 grams per day. And it's more than the recommended, which is around the 25 to 30, depending on the country. And then participants in the high fermented food diet, they aim to consume, they tend to consume an average of 0.4 servings per day at the beginning, at the baseline, and this was increased to more than 6 servings per day at the end of the maintenance. And here I also have the information of what meant the serving of fermented food. So it could be any of the following: kombucha, yogurt, kefir, buttermilk, of around 6 ounces. Moving on, what were the results of the study? So these researchers were really interested to see if the fermented food or the high fiber diet or both could have an effect on diversity, but also what would be the effect on the various immune parameters. And what they saw, so when it comes to the high fiber diet, the microbiota diversity remained unchanged. And although there was an increase in some short-chain fatty acid and carbohydrate degrading enzymes, and this was due to the fact that there was a lot of carbohydrates consumed due to the high fiber intake. But at the same time, overall microbiota diversity didn't change. When it comes to the cytokine response, that remained unchanged, and this is also a sign of the inflammatory response. So it seems that the increased fiber intake alone and over a short period of time, as this was the case in this study, is insufficient to increase the microbiota diversity. Let's move on to the next diet, so the high fermented food diets, which is also more relevant for this webinar. So what they actually saw there is that the microbiota diversity steadily increased with the consumption of high fermented food diets. And they also saw, quite importantly, that there was decrease in inflammatory markers like in cytokines, but also in some types of immune cells like T cells or so, which are showing how active our system is. So what they could conclude is that the fermented foods may be a solution in increasing the microbiome diversity, and they are effective also in decreasing chronic inflammation. So this is quite promising. Except from these studies, I would also like to present some other emerging evidence showing how the consumption of fermented food and live dietary microbes in general can be associated with many health outcomes. So this is one of the first studies that use the enhanced database. And what they wanted to show, to see here is whether the consumption of live dietary microbes is associated with many health outcomes. And in this, they used the enhanced, and they saw that with an increase of 100 grams of fermented foods, they could see that this had a positive effect on almost all these parameters, like mean diastolic blood pressure, body mass index, C-reactive protein, almost all of the parameters. So this is also quite an important finding to keep in mind. And this is not the only study that did it, but this was the first study. So except from these studies, there are many more now coming in the last 3 years, so from 23 and afterwards. So basically, many studies now are using the enhanced database, and they try to associate the consumption of dietary live microbes with a variety of outcomes. And I can mention some of them, like for instance, metabolic syndrome, of chronic cognitive function, of chronic kidney disease, or frailty, sarcopenia. So basically too many outcomes, and there are many more studies which are upcoming. And also I want to mention that in these studies, what they are trying to do by using the enhanced database, they have a methodology that is a CERT methodology, which was designed by Marco and Hill, which were the pioneers in this. So they group the consumption of food groups basically into 3 categories, either low or medium or high, with a high microbial content. So except from these studies that they are using the enhanced database and are very focusing on the US population, of course, I wanted to mention that there are many more initiatives which are trying to focus in at the moment on live dietary microbes. So as already, the 3 speakers before me, they presented the DOMINO and the Pimento projects, which are 2 projects which are trying to unravel the fermented foods. But there are many more. There are also initiatives from ISAP, and also initiatives to try to set the path forward about how to introduce the recommended intake of live dietary microbes. So how close are we in establishing a recommended dietary allowance for live dietary microbes? The short answer to this is no, we are not close in this at all, but because we do not have enough data yet, especially from well-designed randomized controlled trials, or data that they show something about the required or the recommended amount to have an effect. We do have not so many data to have safe conclusions at the moment. As I already mentioned, there are more studies on probiotics, but much less on live dietary microbes and on fermented foods at the moment, although, as I saw, there are studies which bring emerging evidence to us. And Of course, we have to take into account that the studies that do focus on microbiome and nutrition, they do have many challenges, which are not only related to microbiome, but also to the nutrition studies per se, because people have difficulties adhering to the diets or to the dietary interventions because there are many confounders. So we have to take that into account. And what do we need in order to have more evidence and be able to say to people, okay, you should eat this amount of fermented foods? We need more dedicated, high-quality research, more RCTs, where we can also have microbiome-focused endpoints and also validated endpoints to be able to justify the inclusion also of fermented foods in dietary recommendations. And of course, I want to present if at the moment, what is the state of the art? Are in any parts of the world live dietary microbes or fermented foods part of the recommendations? So let's not forget that fruits, vegetables, and dairy, yogurt and cheese are part of the dietary recommendations worldwide. So in a way, they are part of the recommendation. At the same time, really specifically and explicitly mentioning recommending fermented food, that's only the case in 2 countries, and this is Kenya, where they recommend fresh milk, fermented milk, and yogurt daily, and also South Africa, where they recommend mash, which is a popular regional fermented milk, and yogurt daily. So by now I covered the scientific perspective, so I would like to move on to the consumer perspective and why then live dietary microbes could show an interest for consumers. As was already mentioned also by Jutta, consumers have an interest in this, and this is also what you can see like the Google search, and we see that these both microbiome, gut health, and probiotics are terms that they show an increasing trend. And these are results from 2024, and there is an increase of more than 30% in the interest that consumers show when it comes to gut health and microbiome, and around 8% more searches when it comes to probiotics when you compare them with the previous year. So these are terms that they are of increasing interest for the consumers. And at the same time, besides the interest in these searches, consumers seems to also be interested in really buying these products. So what we see is that there is an increase in the global market of the digestive health products, which is valued at 100 billions and is increasing with an annual growth rate of around 9% and is expected to reach 230 billions by 2034, according to sources of the to Food Navigator Europe. What drives this interest in the consumers? There seems to be many reasons behind this interest. So one is the changing consumer preferences. Another thing is the preferences for functional foods at this moment. Another aspect is the busy schedules and the need for immune support through a healthy gut. So they are really interested in supporting their cells through the busy times. Of course, we have to take into account that there is a growing aging population, and this population is seeking for healthy diets to support longevity and healthy aging. And there seems that there is a rise in disposable income. Some people can spend more in products that they can support their health. And also there are rising health costs, and people want to buy products that they could support their health. So this is what consumers are interested and are willing to pay, and these are the reasons why they want these products. But what do they actually know about the products? So according to a survey that this was done by IPA Europe in 2022, they seem not to be really, they think they know, as you also presented before, but in reality, they're a bit not so well informed when it comes to what they what these products are. And for instance, in the question, what do you actually know about probiotics in products? In 7 out of 8 countries, more than 50% of the consumers answered that they don't really know. So the only country that where people said that, okay, we actually know what probiotics are in the products was Poland, with 45% of consumers saying, yes, we do. 55% saying, yes, we do, and 45% saying, no, we don't know. And what do they actually need, these consumers? We think that we all need safe, nutritious, sustainable, and tasteful products. And this is where the food industry can play a role, because they can use fermentation, which is a means to provide these safe, nutritious, and sustainable products, but at the same time provide products where the fermentation can improve the taste and texture, they can improve the preservation, they can enhance the nutrition, improve digestibility. So fermentation is a means to provide of this product, all of these products that consumer needs. At the same time, industry can take this also consumer interest, but also can take this into account, but also the need for this healthy and sustainable nutritious product. And we see for this reason that there is an increase in available products. There is a variety of cat food products. There are products covering all needs and tastes. For instance, gut-friendly gummies, cereals, chocolates, even pet foods that they are specifically gut-friendly or so. And at the same time, with a wide variety of safe microorganisms combined with a wide variety of substrates like milk, vegetables, fruits, cereals, and meat, this allows an endless combination of new foods and drinks that the industry can provide safely to the consumers and can be developed. And of course, industry can also support the research to develop these products. At the same time, industry can also contribute a lot to the promotion of awareness and to increase the consumer's knowledge about the aspects that they are not really well known by now, like fermentation or dietary microbes. So they can promote awareness together with other stakeholders. They can promote the importance of gut health and also talk about the dangers of changed microbiomes. And they can also promote the awareness of fermented products, fermentation, safety aspects, sustainability, and health benefits. The take-home messages is like live dietary microbes. It is an emerging concept with a lot of evidence showing the various associated health benefits. We need more rigorous studies in order to be able to establish recommended dietary allowance. There is an increase in the interest of consumers. There is a booming market with a plethora of products. And at the same time, the need for safe, nutritious, and sustainable foods can be fulfilled with the use of fermentation. And with that, I want to thank you and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Nikoletta. Very interesting. So there are time for some questions. We are running out of time. It's already 3:30, but there's no problem. So if there are specific questions about the last presentation, please go on.
Yes. So Daria Filchenko will take over the question time from now. So.
Yes, so we have a question, quite a lot of questions from this last presentation, some really nice ones. So the first one that came in from Sevgi is asking, what are some research-based insights that you could share on how to support the communities that are maintaining traditional fermentation practices and also helping to preserve fermented food diversity and microbial diversity? Nikoletta, you're muted.
Can you repeat the question, please? Yeah.
Yes. So what are some research-based insights that could on how to support the communities that are maintaining traditional fermentation practices? So small, informal producers who are helping to kind of push back against the industry's monoculturing of fermented food diversity.
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, the question is about how we can support the... Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question, but my view on that is like, of course, it's really important to support these initiatives and have people or small companies, produce this kind of products, local products and fermented products, but it's always important to follow protocols and follow safety procedures so that they follow fermented protocols. Yeah, this is my view.
Okay. And then we have another question on what kind of fermented foods are helpful to lower inflammation that were found in the study. And also a follow-up about the average of LDM that is meaningful.
So the average that is meaningful is from what it seems from studies, but that's why also purposefully I didn't really mention that, is because we really don't know. But it seems that more than 2 times 10,000 in the ninth of colony-forming units. But this is really in the beginning of the research. That's why also I didn't mention that. We don't really know at the moment. But of course, when you see that from studies with 6 portions of fermented food, you can have some positive health outcomes, you can imagine that it cannot be that you can only consume 1 serving per day and then you will have some health benefits. But we are not there yet to know exactly the recommended amount.
And then one other question from Ulke that's saying maybe this is a controversial topic, but that raw milk and meat is kind of a trend, and processing techniques that are actually protecting a lot of consumers are now being framed as evil by this pushback against or this kind of trend for raw milk and meat because it kills the LDM. So what do you have an opinion on how to stop this kind of dangerous misinformation?
Yeah, that's why we are trying to increase awareness because, yeah, of course, it's very nice to consume live dietary macros, but safety comes first. And with raw milk consumption, safety does not come first. There is a reason that for years we already pasteurize milk.
And then also the first question, if that was meant for all the panelists. So if someone had anything to add on that, on how to support the small informal producers. Otherwise, I think, yeah, if someone has a quick comment on that.
Yeah, we actually looked at the innovation activity in the fermented food sector, and we see that many companies are actually trying to introduce new products into the market. So we looked at the Global New Product Database, meat alternative and fermented beverages. So there is a lot of activity, but with the stakeholder discussions in our living labs, we saw that I think many stakeholders think that it's really important to substantiate health claims so that they can actually make statements on their products because they think that would really help them to market their products. I hope this is maybe one element of an answer.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all the questions answered now.
So maybe I can just take over because I had one question at the beginning, and it's making a nice link between Nikoletta's talk and Jutta's talk. So there was one of the data you showed, Jutta, and one of the conclusions you draw is that when you ask for cheese-like, plant-based cheese-like fermented food and vegetable fermented food, it seems that gut-friendly microbes are not seen as well when you talk about vegetables than cheese-like. So it's very surprising. And And it comes back to one of the questions we had from one of the participants at the beginning. Says, if we have used, instead of bacteria, something like probiotics or live dietary microbes, probably the words are very important also for the perceptions. But how could you explain that, microbes from vegetables are not seen as gut-friendly as for cheese? That's very weird.
Well, I think it has something to do with consumer expectations and their knowledge of like the type of product they are consuming. Michail has also been showing, and Nikoletta, I think that vegetables and fruits carry microbes. Yeah, so I'm not so convinced. So I cannot really say anything. We didn't ask probiotics as a word in our survey. Maybe something to follow up on. But maybe it sounds positive, but I doubt that consumers really understand what is meant by that.
Probably, yes. Thank you. I think there's some additional questions.
There's one last question in the chat, if there's some time. Someone is Meltem is asking about the link between fermented foods and conditions like SIBO. Can fermented foods be helpful, or do they risk worsening symptoms? I'm not sure exactly who the question was for. Maybe it's open to the whole panel.
I can give an answer, although this is like in questions like this with medical conditions, we should all be very careful. But what the American College of Gastroenterology recommends is not to, or to be very careful with the amount of fermented food. But this is really a specific question that is better to be addressed to the healthcare professional.
Yeah.
And if I may as well, and this is something that why we need it, because it's which fermented foods and which microbes and where are they coming from. So therefore information of the specifics. So it's not something that can be responded in general. We need more information on the types of fermented foods as well that is consumed in such situations and the whole attributes behind it. It's different when it comes from yogurt compared to vegetables or plant-based cheese and so on.
Okay, I think there are no more questions yet.
Yeah,
so
I think we're running out of time. It's already 15 minutes behind the schedule. I would like to thank you, the speakers, again very much for their time and availability for answering the questions. Thank you very much for the participants. And as my colleague Deborah mentioned, so the video will be available on the Domino website. And if you have specific requests for the presentations, I would suggest that you ask directly the speakers of the availability of the presentation. So thank you again to all of you, and hope to see you in the next DOMINO Stakeholder Forum. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.